So to begin the conference, I'm really delighted to start off with a Blue Future Office, perhaps the biggest idea that we're talking about at the FT. You can see I'm in the office today along with not very many other people, and I'd like to welcome our panelists. Sabine M is Thought Leadership and Research Manager for Lockerty. Chris Kane is an author, advisor and advocate at Six Ideas. Janet Pogue McLaurin is Principal Global Workplace Research Leader and Principal at Gensler. Tim Yendel is VP Workplace, Real Estate and Projects for BP. And my name's Isabel Berwick. I'm the FT's Work and Careers Editor, and I'm your chair for today. So I wanted to sort of start this off with quite a deep philosophical question, but I think it's one that's quite often overlooked in all the discussions we've been having. What is the purpose of the office, and has that changed dramatically over the past year or so? And I wanted to kick off by asking Chris, as someone who has a sort of macro view of this.
Thank you. In a word, yes. But to be fair, we've never really had to ask that question before. Pre-lockdown, we've taken the office work for granted. The office concept, if we think about it, hasn't really changed since it was originally conceived as a paper processing factory. Notwithstanding that over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen huge advances in technology, the maturing of cloud computing, and yet we're still fixated with having all our workers in the same place Monday to Friday, and it seemed to be the only way of working. Then along came COVID, and we had this massive experiment of working from home foisted on us. And I think it was very surprising for a lot of businesses, both leaders and workers, that the wheels didn't come off. And a lot of folk, I think for the first time ever, had time to ask some fundamental questions about how we work, when we work, and who we work with, and when we do this work. So when I was researching the book called Where's My Office, the fundamental question is, what is the purpose of the office? And the conclusion from speaking to many people around the world was, the only purpose of space is to enable the performance of the business. And like never before, people, both employers and employees, have started to ask the question, why should I commute? Why do I need to go to an office just to send email? This whole work from home experiment has proved that it's possible to do things differently at scale. But it's brought about huge behavioral and attitudinal changes in the workforce. People have tasted alternative ways of working. But be very clear, and I'm sure my colleagues in the panel will confirm this, as will other speakers, that work from home is not a panacea in itself, but it has opened up a whole new range of possibilities. And this is a huge management challenge because it undermines conventional thinking of having everybody in the same place at the same time. But it's also unprecedented because this is happening to all business right around the globe at the same time. So the office versus the work from home debate is flawed. It's binary thinking when we're living in a multi-dimensioned world. And there's a lot of noise out there about what to do next. And to be honest, nobody really knows. At Six Ideas, we're helping people to find fresh perspectives, to figure things out. And I think we have to look at the period of the next couple of years to stand back, to experiment, and have the courage to innovate. Because you look at it, there are three things. The nature of office work can change to embrace sort of this digital dimension of working from home, and that our experience of the last year has proved that to be pretty viable. Office workers don't need to be in one fixed place for the entire working week. Office workers themselves have now realized that they have choice, and even across the generations, and they're exercising that choice. Witness the recent letter by Apple employees to their CEO pushing back on the edict of getting back to the office. And I think bosses too are also starting to accept that the employer-employee game has changed fundamentally. The war for talent will rage like never before. And last but not least, the physical manifestation of all of this, the buildings, the offices themselves, need to be, I think, redesigned. And I'm sure Tim and others will comment upon this, not to house all business activities, but focusing more on face-to-face interactions to facilitate collaboration, creativity, and culture building. The days of rows and rows of desks and corner offices, all situated in soulless buildings, are coming to an end.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I just wanted to ask the other panelists on that quite profound question of what is the purpose of the office. Sabine, I know that you're coming at it from quite a different perspective. What are your takeaways so far?
Well, it's a philosophical question, so let me go into a little bit of a philosophical answer to that. Quite factually put, the office used to be the place where we conducted work. And even prior to the pandemic, what you could acknowledge is that people who felt connected to their workspace, to their employer, to their office, who were proud of where they worked, they had a higher engagement. So for me going forward, the purpose of the office is to connect. And what that connection will be very much individual to everyone. Looking at what they want to do at the office and are seeking at the office. That might be coming for certain equipment that you need, or connecting to the company culture, or connecting to your colleagues. So very much individual connection.
Thanks, Sabine. And Tim, I know you're actually involved in offices. Ahead, have you been thinking about this? What's the purpose of the office looking forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what's been taking a lot of headspace up for us is thinking about how we encourage people back. And, for me, the office is about creating, as has been said, creating those connections. We know that we can do emails from anywhere. And so the office is an opportunity for people to connect, to network, to learn, to socialize. And I think we're going to be seeing more of our buildings as destinations. And certainly we're seeing them as sort of ecosystems that can do a wide variety of different activities housed all in one space. And that could be some time at desk, or it could be working with your colleagues, spreading information, communicating, bringing the community in, and doing the stuff that actually the glue that makes it worthwhile going into the office. So it is a challenge, I think. As from a technology perspective, I think actually we're experiencing better technology at home than sometimes we're getting in the office, and I think that will be an interesting challenge to try and solve as we start to migrate back in.
And Janet, it'd be interesting to hear from you on this, but also taking it forward a bit. It's already been mentioned about this question of how do we make it worth the commute? And I know you've global experience in regions where people are already substantially back in the office. Is there anything we can learn from that already?
I think we can. In order to be worth a commute, it's got to be a place that people really want to be, and it's got to support the work that we can't do remotely. So it's a place that we get our best work done, where we feel healthy and valued, we feel inclusive, and that we belong, and that we build not only our personal but professional relationships, and reinforces that culture and builds community. But people want flexibility too. And Gensler has been doing a series of global workplace surveys since 2005. And during the pandemic, we increased our research efforts fourfold to really understand how work was changing and what do people really want in a post-pandemic workplace. And it was trying to understand how and where people wanted to work. And so as we saw some major differences between countries. So China was the first country back. Only 1% are working from home. 4 out of 5 Chinese office workers are currently in a hybrid work model. And unlike other countries, working remotely is not working from home. Their cities have been open for quite a while, and people are working 22% of their time in alternative company locations, co-working, third places like coffee shops, libraries, parks. And it's returned to be very similar to what we measured in China in 2016. So to contrast that, I live in Washington, D.C., and in the U.S., most companies were planning a return to work at the end of the summer after Labor Day. So we were all gearing up to be back kind of in September. But the Centers for Disease Control recently announced that it's lifting the indoor mask mandate for those fully vaccinated. So now companies are starting to accelerate the return phase over the summer. And so in the US, we measured that 1 out of every 2 office workers prefer a hybrid work model. And by hybrid, I mean that they're spending time working remotely and at the office. They want both. It's not in either full-time at either place. But in the US, with 1 out of every 2 office workers, that was the most conservative. We saw 2 out of 3 survey respondents in the US, Australia, and India. We saw 3 out of 4 in France. And China was the most progressive with 4 out of 5. So they're not only working that way, but they prefer to work that way in the future.
That's fascinating. Do any of the other panelists want to come in with a global perspective on what we already know about going back to the office and future trends?
I think my colleagues in Australia, who've also experienced that, I think they're 80% back to normal. And even with cities where the average commute is relatively low compared to congested cities such as London, New York, or Tokyo, are saying that the request for flexibility is probably stronger than ever, and this is also tied in with this whole talent thing. That those sections of the office workforce where the demand is greater than the supply, the employees are saying we want more flexibility, so some form of mixed mode, blended. And as Janet was saying, that we're all trying to grapple with what does hybrid mean, and for some people it can mean probably an either or for some others it can mean blended. I think the key message for this is that one size doesn't fit all anymore.
No, absolutely. And I wanted to just drill down a bit into the data we've got about employees, and Janet's mentioned some there. I mean surveys of mood and well-being, but also density, footfall, who's in the office, and looking at what earlier patterns and now and the future. Sabine, how can employers use data most effectively at this time to project their future needs?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the office environment prior to pandemic, and you look really at the metrics that you have around density and capacity, and then of course the employee well-being, what you have to admit is that the office environment wasn't ideal for employees anyways before. So we didn't get it right before. And I think Chris said a lot about that earlier, from the office coming from the industrial age and not much having been changed. Just going from fixed to flex, still having the same desk rows, doesn't make much of a difference to the engagement and the experience you have. Now, the office has been designed as well top down, with a capacity or savings goals in mind mostly. And I think going forward, what needs to happen is that we take that data that is within companies already out of the silos, because some of it will be in the HR department, some of it is already in the corporate real estate organizations, some of it will be in the finance or legal teams, and bring that together to build a holistic approach to looking at the workspace in a quantified manner, and then micro experimenting with amenities you provide or certain settings you provide, and really testing for the future. And then again, being committed to looking at it for a longer term, because I think a lot of it is still in flux and needs to evolve over time. And what you basically would do is you go together with your peers in the other parts of the organization and look at what you have. And I said it before, there's a lot of things that companies already have. They do have the data sources, but you need to build the knowledge and skills around reading from it and acting upon it as well. And then you would start to identify, what do I actually want to do? What metrics can I read from, and where can I act upon? Because it doesn't really make sense to populate data that you can't really act upon. It's just effort that's then in the end wasted. And then with that gap analysis, you can go out and identify what you need to add to that mix to triangulate relevant data points, and then to get your storytelling and your insights from there when you try to co-design or co-create bottom up what the office should be.
That's really interesting. So it's essentially, you might already have a ton of stuff that you're not using effectively. And I think that's a really good takeaway. And I wanted to bring Tim in at this point to talk about planning offices, but also to talk about the technology side of this. How do we know what technology we're going to need? I've seen a lot of articles about reconfiguring conference rooms so that people who aren't there don't feel left out. But what does that actually mean in offices? How are we going to use tech, and specifically communications tech, with mixed or hybrid teams?
Yeah, and I think when we go back to the original question around what's the purpose of the office, I envisage people coming in back to work with their colleagues in slightly different ways. The typical everybody sits around a meeting room and then somebody dials in, I think poses huge challenges for that equity of experience. And so I think the technology is going to have to grapple with, how do we replicate the experience that we've had at home? And I think it is for many people a good experience in terms of how you can share documents instantly without, when you're in a room, having to plug a few things in and try and get the screen to work. So I think there's this whole experience which we need to grapple with. And then also, I think there's tools around how we make it much more immersive for people, because people will be managing global teams in different time zones. And so I think when people come physically into the space, one, we have to grapple with the fact that they want space that's going to be flexible, reconfigurable, that they can access in an instant without having to turn something on or to get an IT specialist to get it to work. So I think we've got to make the experience, the physical experience, as and get that working seamlessly with the technology. And I think, yes, we'll start with meeting rooms and we need to replicate that experience. But then I think it's about, how do we use the opportunity of greater collaboration space, whether it's sort of Scrum space, town hall, all these kind of spaces that we can encourage people back by providing. So I think it's got a long way to go. There are a number of technology companies that are grappling with that. And I think there's another aspect is, how do we find people? If people are coming in on different times on different days, how do we provide colleagues with the ability to have sort of planned water cooler or sort of planned corridor moments where you bump into people? So I think finding people, but also knowing when they're going to be within a set network, I think is going to be something that we'll see come through in a massive way from a colleague app perspective. And I think that's going to be really important.
That's fascinating. Chris, it'd be interesting to hear what you've thought about in terms of this communication immersion theme, which is coming through very strongly. We're seeing a lot of people talking about this in terms of the people we talk to at the FT. It seems to be one of the dominant themes of the future of the office.
And understandably, I think, one of the things that's staring us in the face is that, we have a lot of technology solutions that have existed for years that a lot of people have never really learned how to use properly. And then you also think about the experience now, as Tim quite rightly said, needs to be much more fluid and frictionless and frustration free. How many of us have experienced going to meeting rooms and the technology didn't work? So we've got to get our act together to make sure that the experience is top notch, and we've a long way to go on all of that. But the other side, I talk a lot about people in place. And it's the people bit. It's how leaders and managers choose to, run their teams, which will be a mixture of physical and virtual. the whole, the rules of engagement, the cultural aspects for all of this as we move into a completely different paradigm. If you just, to take a radical view, you just look at all of us. All of us have been in the workplace for a certain period of time. Have we asked, say, a 25, 26-year-old how they're going to cope, and how they are coping, and how they're using technology which is available as individuals to find people? And there's lots of apps emerging which are saying, or are seeing the opportunity of mixing opportunity with where people happen to be at a certain point in time, given that, in my view, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 is in the last chapter.
And I'd like to bring Janet in here and just to talk perhaps about that technology aspect, but also to take it forward a bit. What is the wish list for people in offices going forward? I keep reading about ping pong tables for some reason. And Chris has just mentioned there about younger generations might want different things. Is the new office design going to be about keeping people safe? I mean, do we need more space in offices? Or is it about the collaboration piece, which might mean being quite close together? What are the main things on this?
Well, I think it's making people feel safe, healthy, and valued is going to be critical for that initial return to the office. But as we start thinking about a post-pandemic workplace, future office designs will need to adapt as the pandemic starts to ease, but also adjust if new variants start to emerge, or another pandemic, or even a climate event. So it's an opportunity to think in terms of how does the office work in low risk scenarios and high risk in order to keep the business going? But and I totally agree with, I think Sabine had mentioned this, that future designs, they've got to fix what wasn't working in the pandemic, pre-pandemic in the office. Things like noise, distraction, is it too open or too crowded to focus? Even the air quality. But at the same time, they need to bring the best of what we have discovered working from home back to the office, like access to private spaces. We've gotten very used to doing, these types of events, virtual collaborating in from home, and the thought about going back to the office, sitting out in the open and doing a Zoom call or a webinar is it necessarily going to work for our neighbors sitting close to us? We have to think about the upgraded tech and the virtual collaboration tools to create that connected experience for people that are not only in the office but outside the office. But health and well-being is also important, like healthy food, well-being, access to outdoor spaces. So we're seeing in our research, we've been asking about what are your desired amenities? And we've seen a shift post-pandemic to becoming very pragmatic. It's all about getting the work done efficiently and prioritizing employee well-being and health, thinking about like gyms and outdoor workspaces and preventative care and even healthcare services. So now is the time to test those new ideas, learn what works, learn what people value, your employees value, and start to build upon it. So it's an opportunity to kind of focus on why people are coming to the office and design specifically for those reasons to get the mix of spaces right. Most people don't want to get dressed up, put kids in daycare, and commute to the office just to socialize. We know that's an important component of being part of a community. But it's really about doing their best work individually and collectively as a team, and about their professional development and growing the next generation. So thinking about how to build this culture for creativity and innovation is what we're really thinking about. And the wish list items are all those things that reinforce those great experiences and that creativity and innovation.
And Sabine, could I bring you in on this? Just in terms, we mentioned earlier about younger generations. Is there a difference in the data that you see between older workers and younger workers in the future design of the office and what they and how they work?
Well, there is differences, and they're actually surprisingly not what you would expect, because the expectation has been that the younger generations would adapt really well to a digital workplace, and it's actually, I don't want to say it's not the case, but they're actually craving more of that interaction than the people who have been settled in their career and who have had experience in the workplace already. I think it's adding to the point that Chris mentioned, that we've all been in the workplace for quite a while. We know how things work. We did have that ease in period, and we can actually draw from the social capital that we have built in the past. And new joiners, for example, they can't really. That's why they had a hard time in the last year as well. What I feel what younger generations are looking more into as well is that diversity. They're embracing that more, the individual needs in the workspace. And I think that's something that would be for sure be on my office wish list, that we cater to all kinds of different demand. Because when we talk about now that the office should be the hub of connection and collaboration and community, the introvert employee persona might feel this is their biggest nightmare and never want to come back to the office again. So these spaces, these focus spaces where you can have your alone and dedicated work time as well, we can't disregard them completely. So it should be, again, that embracing differences in the workforce and different situations as well with the office design.
Right. So a neurodiverse employee, for example, might want a quiet space, and we might have more of those in future within what was an open plan office, which has to be a good thing, I think. We just touched on culture there. Corporate culture, it's still in our minds very tied to place. And I just wanted to bring Tim in here. Can we have corporate culture without linking it to place? And if so, how do we develop that when we're thinking about the future of our workspaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture develops from a number of different places, and part of that is around the sort of behaviours and leadership that the organisation has. But I think one thing which is very much sort of coming into focus is around this sort of digital empathy that we need to develop, both because we've been working so intensively for so long. What I think we've realized is that the hours have stretched without us necessarily knowing, because we don't have the commute. And I think when we start to return to the office, we need to create those gaps. These were the gaps that you use to walk to the next meeting or you get yourself a cup of coffee. And actually our days are so intense at the moment, meeting after meeting after meeting. So I think, the physicality of the space, we have to sort of come up with something that recognizes the different time zones, recognizes the barriers, and when you should be shutting off and when you should be starting, and giving people the opportunity to be trusted and to do their best work in the location that is going to have the most value for them and the team. So I think it's not a straight answer, and I think it will depend on the pre-existing culture of the organization and then which bits morph, because I think this is going to be very iterative. It's almost like a minimal viable product. We'll do some stuff and we'll test it, we'll course correct if we need to, and that's as much in company culture, I think, as in the physical workplace, because you try things out and if they don't work, you try something else. And so I don't think we're ever going to jump into the final answer. I think it's going to morph over time, and that sort of digital empathy, that different digital culture, I think will start to blend in.
That's real. I really like the digital empathy phrase. And I wanted to bring Chris in here. Do you think we need new words for what we do at work? I mean, digital empathy might be one. Is corporate culture an outdated term?
Whatever about corporate culture, we need to go back to first principles. And, as Sabine, I think, mentioned about sort of people and their sensitivities, whether that's introvert or extrovert. Think about the language you've been using, for years: hot desking, remote working, hybrid. All of these terms are inappropriate, in my view, to a progressive organization making the best use of its talent, because the talent will vote with their feet. And the acid test for any leading organization going forward will be to be seen by the workforce of the future, and also to retain their workforce as an employer of choice. So when you say remote working, what does that mean to some people? Not everybody. It means you're ostracized, you're working elsewhere, you're not in the center. And don't get me started about hot desking. BBC W1A did their good job on that bit of satire. But we need to think about all of this from a people point of view, because for years we've been driving offices with an effective or an efficiency agenda rather than an effectiveness agenda. And we got to really start thinking about our people and how they can actually do their best work without frustration.
Janet, you were nodding there. Would you like to come in on? Yes, do.
Because, I totally agree. It's all got to be about people and grounded in people and what their experiences are. And it's a chance to start thinking about how to be even more inclusive. It's designing to the edges. It's not designing for the 80% of your staff and knowing that there's 10% on either side that really don't fit in. This is a time to be even more inclusive. And how do we think about designing for the people that are in there 5 days a week, 5 days, 5 days a month, and 5 days a year, and how do we make everybody feel welcome? How do we feel connected? Even if you may be working remotely, traveling on business that day, working from home to get some focus work in. We want to really celebrate when we are together. So when we do come together to build and reinforce that culture that we were talking about, it has to be very intentional. And that can take place, whether you're remote or physically. But if you're not in every day, it's even more important for that to be palatable when you do come to the office.
And to take it on a bit, we talked a little bit about experimentation there. And Sabine, are there companies that are looking at the data and trying different things in terms of what employees are saying they'd like to do? And is that destabilizing? People tend to like certainty, and we haven't had much of it. What's the best way forward?
Yeah, that's right. We didn't have a lot of certainty in the past year. But the majority of people actually wants flexibility. And that's what companies have been looking at in surveys, in their employee satisfaction questionnaires. And the answer has been across the board that people would like to keep that approach, to decide on their own if they want to come in or not. And I think actually that it's quite powerful to do these experiments because it includes the employees' feedback in it. It allows them to co-design what they actually like and to iterate. I think Tim mentioned that before on what the workplace should actually look like, and to go away from that stigma of, okay, here's your workplace, like it or not, that's where you're going to work now, 8 to 5, for the foreseeable future, without much course correction possible, because there's been so much money already invested in building out this really nice office. And through these experiments, you actually have the chance to really identify what the super drivers for your employee engagement are, what builds that sense of connection for your staff, and what keeps them from moving away to another company. And to look beyond, actually, to come back to that ping pong table example, to look beyond, is that ping pong table used at what is this reflective of? Because not everybody likes to play ping pong, to be honest. So some people might be thrilled about that table in the office, and some might be whatever. But it's reflecting more of a value of the company trusting their employees and saying, we care about the work getting done, and we acknowledge that requires conscious breaks to be taken. And that's why we provide these areas for you. So it's more about that than it is really the ping pong table in itself.
I'm going to move to questions in a minute, so do please keep asking some in a minute, but I just wanted to finish up this main part of the discussion by asking panelists, what is it that we don't yet know about the future of the office and commercial real estate? If you can predict a trend, for example, that hasn't hit the mainstream, that would be really helpful for our viewers. Chris, I'd like to kick that one off with you.
Wow, what a challenging question, because we're really in a period of great uncertainty, the like of which we've never seen before. And if anyone tries to make comparisons with the global financial crisis or the 1990s recession, forget it. We are looking at something which will probably be written about as the 21st century renaissance. And it's really too early to identify trends, because the smart companies are, as I think has been said earlier, they're dipping their toe in the water. They're trying things. Those who have been run by white alpha male leaders demanding people getting back to the office, they've seen the response of their workforce. So there are three indicators I think people should look to. From an occupier perspective, the smart corporations are really starting to think about their workforce strategies and their real estate portfolios. Two quick examples: Standard Chartered Bank in the Middle East talk about their near home, near client working, and for their real estate, twice the experience and half the space. But there's also another major professional services firm who are thinking about the individual as the workplace, and to using AI to facilitate 21st century consulting and completely redefine their workplaces. This is a major challenge for the real estate world, who've never had to deal with the threat of utter disruption before. And given about the huge debate about the future of work, there's really huge potential for new entrants to enter into the market of providing space as a service. And I think last but not least, we're now starting to see at policy level, governments and cities coming up with their own response, which will impact how we shape things going forward. Three examples there: the mayor of Paris and the 15-minute city concept. Spain is experimenting with a 4-day working week nationally. And Ireland, I'm proud to say, its national remote working strategy, which focuses on 3 pillars: remote worker rights, broadband infrastructure, and remote work hubs. So I think it's a question of all change.
Thank you, Chris. Tim, what would you want the viewers to know about what's around the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Chris. It's almost now impossible to predict. I think, though, from conversations with peers, that it's around having a blend. So having a blend of larger spaces that you can bring people in for all of the reasons we've been talking about today, but also thinking around the sort of regionality and the more local opportunities to create spaces that are in and around perhaps where you've got centres and concentrations of people that work for the organisation. And then, of course, there's the third spaces that are run by other operators. So I think that there's likely to be organisations wanting that flexibility, and not just to have the big global headquarters and nothing else, to give people, their own people, the ability to flex into these third spaces and more local options. So whether that materializes, time will tell. But as Chris said, we're in unprecedented times, and I think it will be a while before we see the wood from the trees.
We won't hold you to it, Tim. So, but Janet, how would you characterize the biggest sort of upcoming trend?
I would add that I predict a continued rise in autonomy. This pandemic has allowed people to step back and assess not only how they want to spend their time, but their purpose and family and all the elements of work life. And, according to Microsoft study, 41% of people may be considering changing jobs this next year, which I think is a real wake-up call. Leaders want predictability, and most want their employees back to the office. But post-pandemic, employers will vote with their feet and try to find jobs that align with their personal values, where they want to live, and the amount of flexibility that they desire. And we're already seeing that, in our cities research, that that young people in particular are relocating to smaller cities where it's more affordable, where they have the right balance, and no big city, problems. And so this is an opportunity for employers to think about, how is the experience for people that we're trying to create that's beyond just the amount of space that we're leasing and what we provide, but also a vibrant neighborhood and third places near the office that can start to be an extension of the office. Because I think the blurring that has occurred between work and life is something that people want to really hold on to.
Last word in this main bit with you, Sabine. What are you thinking about the future?
I'm adding on to my speakers or my peers before, actually, with that idea of the local offices or local, let's not say offices, let's say the local workplaces or work options becoming more important. And I want to extend that to say, if companies want to understand what experiences people are seeking, you need to analyze those splits as well. You can't only look at your own office space, but you need to understand why people are going to certain other co-working spaces or community spaces or outdoor spaces, what they are seeking there and how that contributes to their well-being and productivity.
Thanks very much. I've got some interesting questions from the viewers now. Does the panel foresee any potential social economic problems if young people are not present in a working environment, e.g. the office? How would they become upwardly mobile? That's a very pertinent question. Tim, is that something you've thought about with your workforce?
Well, I think it's something that the organisation, all organisations will need to grapple with, because I think it's more to do with how talent gets developed in an organisation and the physical presence. When you look at that from a principle, should it make any difference whether somebody's physically in the office to their career development? And I'd say it shouldn't make any difference, but I think it's that opportunity for people that are at a certain point in their careers to be mentored and for them to overhear information and to be able to ask questions. And I think that only really can take place effectively when they're in a physical environment, they're hearing things, they're able to connect with people. So I think longer term, I think you've got to have the right way in which you nurture people in the organisation. But I think also that if you're not physically present, that can have an impact over time.
Janet, did you want to come in on that one?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I would hate for there to be a generational divide in the office and we're not seeing that in our own data. We're seeing that Gen Z and millennials also want to be back at the office for very, very much the same reasons that Tim was talking about in terms of coaching and mentoring and learning from their peers as much as learning from senior people. We've got to come up with ways of attracting and bringing everybody back to the office for certain activities. And it may be that with particularly the younger generations, they want to take advantage of third places more than some of the other generations. They want to be alone and working together in an office environment or in a co-working space where they can turn and learn from one another. So from our experience is, how do we design great places for all generations and for all types of people that is really going to allow that nurturing and growth to occur?
Thanks. And this is I think I'm going to put this one to Chris. Do the panelists see companies cutting commercial realist budgets? We've just talked about satellite offices becoming more popular, but would they be cheaper, or do we actually need more space? What's going on, Chris?
Well, I think the Achilles heel for the real estate industry is that, as Tim and I learned over our many years of looking at efficiency, that most buildings pre-pandemic were never occupied all that efficiently. Probably hitting 55, 60% of total capacity. So there's going to be a fundamental rethink, and I think it'll not be driven by real estate strategies. It'll be just driven by workforce strategies. Any sanguine board now will have to bear in mind the risk factor. We're in pandemic times for the foreseeable future, particularly given that most office buildings are sealed boxes with air conditioning systems, and air conditioning systems designed to a cost, not to a health standard. And that, as we've seen in recent press comments, is another major risk factor. So we're living in a very, very different world. And that's why I say it's all change, because we have to think about factors now, which we've never had to think about before.
Thanks very much. Did anyone else want to come in on the
I would love to
space?
comment on that. We just asked this in our latest survey. We asked this very question, and we found a really interesting response. That top performing companies, those that said that their companies was recently on the best places to work, most admired, and most innovative company list, actually value being able to work in a wide variety of spaces more. And they said they were more likely to expect workplace changes and actually take on more real estate. Whereas when we compared it to the bottom quartile, those that said no to all those lists, it seemed like it was far more reactive, that they viewed real estate as a cost to try to reduce and expected to actually lease less space.
Thank you. This will probably be the last question. I'm going to put this one to Sabine. What about outdoor spaces at work? Should more emphasis be placed on them given the health and wellness benefits of fresh air? Is that something you're seeing coming through in what employees are asking for, or is that a little bit cutting edge?
No, I actually think it's quite valid, and I think we had that earlier when we asked about what does people make people make take the commute, and if it's a sunny, beautiful day and you have the choice of being at home and potentially getting some quality outdoor time in, you might choose that over going to the office. So I think that any workplace that offers these types of settings will have an advantage over those that don't.
And Tim, are you seeing a rise in green spaces inside, outside? I know there's a lot of talk about how offices integrate with their built environment nearby and all of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're seeing, a desire to have that sort of blended space that's but both bringing the sort of greenery into the designs of the office to give people that sort of biophilia in many spaces across the space, and not just putting pot plants in, but actually, really bringing nature to life, but also external spaces where you can get fresh air, you can sit out in the sun, you can work, and it to be okay to do that, I think, is the key thing, and creating that sort of acceptability that, sitting out on a terrace, somewhere is just as valid as sitting inside at a, perhaps a more traditional setting. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, both in and outside of the office.
I think that's a really good time to end. It's almost lunchtime. I'm going to sit on our wonderful rooms here at the FT. I'd like to thank all our panelists. That was a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot. Thank you for watching, and stay online for our next event. My FT colleague, Yanina Comboy, will be with a panel looking at the broader impact of the move to hybrid working. Thanks very much.